Hello and welcome to Horizon, where we look at how the stories of today will affect your tomorrow. This podcast is going to center around politics, tech, and the global forces that are shaping all of our lives. I hope you will join me on this journey. Let's see what happens. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, shout out to those people. You may have heard a thing or two about the US election. This election has really become a tale of two realities. There's the educated side that completely dismisses Donald Trump, and there's a huge amount of people who view them as their savior. Now, where the truth lies and where you may think is exactly what we want to explore in this podcast, trying to peel back the layers of whether you think mainstream media is biased or just reporting the news, or whether you think that there's a conservative conspiracy out to get Hillary Clinton. We want to explore all of that and really try to determine if we approach it from a very neutral perspective, what really happens. Now, let's kind of dive into a little bit of the two biggest political events I've had recently, the RNC and the DNC. Now, with the RNC, the Republican National Convention this year more or less became the Donald Trump disaster. I mean, on paper, you had some themes: make America great, make America work, make America safe, but there was no real connection between any of the speakers on any of the nights. It was almost as if they kind of said, all right, here's the lottery, and first up, oh, Joni Ernst, okay, and in the lottery, oh, Rudy Giuliani, and here we go, just pick, fill, pick, fill, pick, fill, and then, oh, here's some Trump relatives thrown in there for good measure, and it really left you with the feeling of, what were you really going for? Because I feel that there was a story that could have been told if only their campaign was a little bit more organized. I mean, we had Rudy Giuliani and Chris Christie kind of give their best, almost SNL court impression of the people versus Hillary Clinton, which, hey, if we want to make a new FX TV series out of it, by all means, it's people versus O.J. Simpson seem to do well enough, so I'm sure there's some people who would watch that, but I don't really feel like that's the right thing or message that you're trying to convey at a political convention. I'm not sure who's suddenly going to be convinced to vote for you if you're saying lock her up. While it is at times entertaining, it's just sort of kind of at times an eye rolling moment of, come on, like, really? But again, let's see how people perceive that. Now, there was definitely some good speeches. I thought Ivanka Trump's speech, Don Jr.'s speech, and Donald Trump's friend, by far all three knocked out of the park. I mean, Don Jr., I think, really established himself as there's a potential for him to possibly run for mayor in New York City or just possibly be a political figure in the future. I think he does a really good job of what his dad, in theory, is good at, but communicates it a lot better. And same with Ivanka. I mean, to me, I feel like she's a very conservative version of Sheryl Sandberg. I think that both of them are very eloquent, very good at explaining their opinions, but just have some slight differences. So I'll really be curious if she, like Sheryl, also eventually enter the political arena. And that, again, I think is a little bit up in the air. Now, from the rest of the family, Eric Trump, his daughter, and then Melania, that was where stuff kind of got a little bit let down. I mean, if you're not going to make a good speech, don't make a good speech, or don't speak. I'm sorry, but with the whole plagiarism thing, I really think that that's really irrelevant. I mean, she stole 10 lines, give or take, from Michelle Obama's speech. I mean, if she wants to use Michelle Obama as an inspiration, by all means, she is a phenomenal speaker. To me, the bigger issue was not the plagiarism. The bigger issue was the fact the speech just kind of wasn't very good. I mean, I understand it's in English as a second language for her, and that's certainly better than I could do in another language. But if you're going to speak on that stage, at least try to have some more substance beyond just feeling like you're hearing the same thing over and over again, which I felt is really what a lot of her speech came out to be. And then, I mean, poor old Tiffany got thrown on stage, and it just sort of, okay, that should have just been crossed immediately because she added no value. Obviously, I understand that your biggest cheerleaders for Trump are his kids, but she in particular really dropped the ball. And I think that has something to do with not having business experience, but it also has something to do with the Trump campaign putting her in that moment where she was kind of forced to react. So I think that a better campaign probably would have done something different. And then it leads us to Trump's speech. Now, after particularly the build-up on the final night, I was personally expecting that I think we're about to see a new Donald Trump. I think we're about to see Donald Trump who really takes what he's good at and tries to leave some of his past behind. You saw Ivanka build him up. You saw his friend build him up. But then what we got was sort of what was that? It was as if America had become hell on earth. Now, granted, there are a lot of problems with America, but there are certainly plenty of places that are a lot worse, and I also would argue not nearly as bad as the world that Donald Trump pitched or sort of tried to make people aware. And then let's just assume for his sake that there are places that are that bad. I feel like most of those people will be more interested in figuring out how Donald Trump is going to fix those problems as opposed to reminding them, oh, yeah, by the way, yeah, your life kind of sucks. Because if your life sucks already, I don't think you need someone telling you that it already sucks. You merely just need to look in the mirror, look outside, and kind of conceive, yeah, it's pretty bad here. So I think it will be interesting to kind of see if he grapples with that or sort of can somehow move past that in the last few months. But I think one of the things that's really holding him back is his main speechwriter, Stephen Miller, who kind of first rose to prominence during the Duke lacrosse case as the only person who said, you know, these guys are innocent, and basically became him and the lacrosse team versus Duke and Durham. He kind of still has this attitude of me against the world, which worked great in the primary. I mean, him and Corey Lewandowski definitely did at times some questionable tactics to get him there, but it worked. But what I think what you're really seeing, and even with Paul Manafort being brought in, is a campaign that still doesn't actually know how to run a campaign. It's kind of derived on luck. But beyond that, it's just this tornado that Donald Trump spins up around him, and everyone else just, well, I guess we hope for the best. I guess this is what we're going to have, which is unfortunate because it seems in his case he should have a very easy path to an election. Particularly the thing with the FBI indictment from Director Comey, he essentially laid out a political platform for Donald Trump to follow to put Hillary kind of on defensive. Instead, he's allowed himself to basically fall for every single trap that the Democrats and Hillary have laid for him. And you almost just can't step back and just laugh at him and be like, well, if you're that dumb and if you fall for every single one of these traps, well, then maybe you don't deserve to win. And I know MSNBC in particular has really argued that he doesn't really have a huge interest in actually being president. And there are some actions that he's taken recently that really makes it seem that way, that if you really wanted to win, you would do something different, not just keep repeating the same thing over and over again to the same people over and over again. You'd really be trying to figure out, okay, I have these people who they love me and they'll probably go with me wherever I go. But there's a lot of people who potentially could come on board if I could just figure out a way to tailor my message slightly. Because I think it's almost as he feels that if he ever apologizes, if he ever sort of slightly proposes something about how he's going to fix it, then all these people are like, oh my gosh, Donald Trump, he proposed a plan. He actually may have a solution. And they'd run away, which when you think about it, that makes no sense. If people already like you when you don't have a plan, they're not suddenly going to like you less because you said, here's actually how I'm going to make this better. In fact, the only thing that would probably come of that is some people would probably also join you and say, okay, I've heard what you've said. I've now listened. I now see you have an idea. Let me support you. But instead what we get is just day after day after day of just these things where you just think, what is wrong with you? Like, do you understand this is a presidential election and not a dog and pony show? But hey, you know, if he wants to run that campaign, that's fine. Now, on the DNC side, I thought you saw a much better run event. Definitely was obviously a more establishment event. It's been really interesting to see how Bernie Sanders would have run that. But, you know, you saw the boos and people who were anti-Hillary come out in really strong force. And I think that really created a very interesting atmosphere. But despite that, the Democrats still had a very clear message that they wanted to send, which was Donald Trump is unfit to be president. Hillary Clinton has experience. Here's all the people in our party who are behind her. Here's all the support she is going to have. And here is why we are going to fix it. Now, if we took it simply in the vacuum of let's assume that that's all right, then yeah, like by far the speeches were great. The people were obviously great. But it's when you start dissecting it that, again, too, you run into this issue of, well, but how does A plus B equal C? I mean, let's start with good old Bill. Now, Bill tried to make him sound like a good old country bumpkin. You know, I know everyone loves Bubba, but, you know, you kind of probably raped a woman. You've kind of slept with your intern. You kind of just skipped over the whole year of 1998 when that happened. And then with your excess speaking fees and everything else on top of it, it's sort of hard to sort of pretend to be this kind old Southern gentleman while at the same time kind of being an asshole. And I think it was really interesting to hear that speech because, you know, if you hadn't known any of this history, if you hadn't known anything that And is everything that he's been accused of probably true? No, it's probably not. Is some of it true? Probably it is. So if we kind of find this middle ground, it was, overall a decent speech, but you as a person, I may find not believable, or I may just say, that's Bubba. We'll get through it. And then with Obama's speech, it was very interesting because it was almost as if Obama was giving a speech in 2004 or even 2008, which is, we all need to come together, we all need to rally, we all need to do stuff that kind of can solve bigger issues, and essentially saying that I'm the one to solve it. But, here we are 8 years later, and it's really there is a huge discrepancy about how much he has accomplished. You have a decent amount of people, I think 53%, that approves of his job rating. GQ magazine recently come out and said that he's the greatest president ever, kind of should replace the Lincoln Memorial with Obama's face, which, is a very bold statement, but at the same time kind of entertaining. And then you have other people who, they still don't feel like he's legal. They still feel like he is a terrible president. They still feel like he has ruined so much of America. And does some of that have to do with racism? Yeah, it probably does. But are some people genuinely upset? Yes. So I think it's very interesting to see that that's the tone that he tried to strike of, hey, Hillary is going to be the savior of this system. Hillary is going to bring in fresh new ideas, which just doesn't make any sense. I think with Bernie Sanders, that argument would really have fit a lot better. But if you're going to talk about someone who's been part of the system for 30 years, I'm not exactly sure if the argument I would choose for her would be that, she's going to bring in all these new ideas and fix all of our problems. I think that you could probably say that, okay, she probably learned something from Department of State, but then again, with that, you have the Clinton cash issues, you have issues with kind of beyond what's talked about in Clinton cash, the Clinton Global Initiative as a whole, which was just completely ignored. And I think it's just left with, okay, what exactly are we going to get with this person? Now, what I think was a phenomenal piece of political stagecraft was basically laying the political landmine for Donald Trump to step over in form of the Ghan family. A more, let's just say, professional candidate would have just said, look, I may not have agreed with what he said, but thank you for your sacrifice. Wham, bam, story over, moving on. Instead, he gets sucked into this story of, I've made all these sacrifices. He doesn't really understand what I mean, and essentially just makes himself look like an asshole to someone who's lost their son. Now, you saw in kind of conservative media, particularly Breitbart, tried to paint him as, he's very pro-Sharia, he's actually benefited from the Clinton Foundation, which even of itself, I honestly think is also not a big deal, because I don't think anyone expects this guy to be perfect or to be innocent. His son died in 2004. I think someone mentioned, there's been 3 presidential elections since this. But I think it's really a masterful move by the Clinton campaign to political stagecraft saying, we know Donald Trump is going to look like a terrible person if we just have this guy talk. Let's have him talk and let's sit back. And sure enough, Donald Trump steps on the landmine, and this guy basically gets free airtime all the time to talk about how bad Donald Trump is. Score 1, Hillary Clinton. Score 0, Donald Trump. And I think you're just seeing that even though Hillary Clinton should honestly lose for all of her different issues, it's not like he's having to run against Bernie Sanders, which if Bernie Sanders were won, I think it'd been a lot harder to have so many glaring faults. You could maybe get him on policy things that you say, I don't think that's the right way, but it doesn't have this questionable legality or just poor judgment issue that surrounds Hillary's performance so far that Donald Trump just seems to ignore or be incapable of adequately explaining to someone how that's a problem. Now, Hillary, though, again, viewing and the void, phenomenal speech. Let's talk about how we're stronger together. Let's talk about how we're going to have equal pay for equal work. Let's talk about how we're going to improve the lives for the most disenfranchised people in America. All great things. The issue is how are you actually going to do that when your career has been spent on essentially profiting from these people? I think that one thing that really also have helped her is choosing Cory Booker versus Tim Kaine as a running mate. Why? Because I think Cory Booker would have added a lot more excitement to her campaign. He's funny, he's engaging. I think he did a very good job as well of establishing a career for himself in the future. But I think she's really missing some of that dynamic that could really have, brought in some fresh blood and say, look, with my experience at Corey's Energy, we think we can make a great team. Essentially, she got herself, which has experience, and Tim Kaine, who's a limp noodle, who just is not inspiring, who gets bored of her speeches, and I think really doesn't add stuff to her ticket. I mean, with Biden, at least, he had his foreign experience, but he's also really funny. He was engaging. He made gaffes. It was kind of like, ha ha ha, there's Uncle Joe again saying something stupid. But I think it all kind of also ties back into what is the status of the economy? Now, it's very hard to say with low interest rates and a lot of capital investment. Some people are saying it's good. Some people are saying it's bad. Again, probably somewhere in the middle. The most probably neutral objective is you look at the most recent quarterly reports from most publicly listed companies in the US. And with the exception of Facebook, they were pretty abysmal. And it's hard to see, is that just this quarter? Is that something that's systemic, that all the quantitative easing that has been invested into the economy to kind of prop it up at low interest rates, is that catching up? And I think it's really not clear, but I think as voters, you really have to decide of, do I think that the Barack Obama methodology will work for 4 more years, or do we need to change? But I think the hardest thing about saying we need to change is I don't think people really know what Donald Trump wants to change to. So I would hope kind of in this lead up to the final 3 months that he would kind of outline of here's exactly the stuff I would fix beyond just saying, oh, it sucks. Because I think most people probably recognize it could be improved, but how are you going to improve it? Now, let's leave the conventions alone and let's take a little step back and let's talk about the news networks. I think MSNBC at times came off as a little bit too much of a left-wing spin doctor. And I know they've always had this reputation. I know it's pretty much the antithesis to Fox News from the liberal direction. But at times it just sort of felt with you're kind of trying a little bit too hard. And I mean, I think that really the greatest program during it was Morning Joe. I think that the people who come on there with having Joe Scarborough with his conservative perspective and Nika with her liberal really balances out with the other commentators that came on. But it also was at times very strange how there seems to not really be someone who ever really comes on there other than his kids who can really argue Donald Trump's perspective. And you may say that has something to do with, well, I'm not sure anyone can because the campaign is not clear. But I think there's also, too, whether it's Jeff Sessions or someone like that, that would be a lot more capable of saying that they support it as opposed to getting the people who have lost as conservative opponents on to speak about the conservative party when it seems like the Republican Party is moving in a completely different direction to where these people have been in the past. So that would be like my main objection. Now, CNN, the Clinton News Network, they by far did a phenomenal job. I think that they had a really good, again, counterplay between different perspectives. I think David Axelrod, regardless of whether or not you agree with this policy, I think he does a very good job of explaining political concept about how they affect different other people's, I guess, speeches. And then it has something to do with how he essentially built Barack Obama's campaign from nothing, utilized data to get him elected and really just understands the forces that are at play in America. One of the kind of the downsides there was having Jeffrey Lord kind of come on and just kind of being left to defend indefensible points and how he would just sort of reach for, I found this tweet, or, but Donald Trump actually meant this. And it just kind of came off as very insincere and weird. And I don't quite know if that was really to say, Donald Trump supporters are dumb or they don't have a leg to stand on. Or maybe it really was. That was the only person they could find. But I think, again, CNN, as obviously they had a left wing. I mean, what Blitzer there drinking a glass of wine during Hillary's speech. Hey, I think that even though they have that bias, I think they did a decent enough job of trying to downplay it. And then there's Fox News. And I think it's become amateur hour since the departure of Robert Ailes. I mean, whether or not he was actually a creep, probably debatable. Maybe you think it's factual. I think at least there was some sense of stuff is moving forward, or we have an organization, we have a message. But I think with his departure and the rise of Trump, that network has just really been on unstable footing. And watching Megyn Kelly during the DNC, it also, again, looked like, oh, here we are, the Fox News Sports Channel, live from the DNC. It's round one of this bash. And she didn't really seem prepared to talk about a convention as much as she did a sporting event with headsets like this, with this kind of very, I don't know if antagonizing perspective, but it seemed like I was about to watch something that was intense, not something that was really designed to make me think or really kind of designed to make me hope for a better future. And maybe that was just them focusing on DNC, but I think it's also too just their network seems to have lost their way. So it'll be interesting to see how they fix that in the months leading up to the election, or maybe it's as MSNBC says, this is all just a one big ploy by Donald Trump to launch Trump TV. Who knows? Now, overall from that section, I really think Donald Trump has a very strong chance to win. I don't necessarily know I like the guy. I don't necessarily know I agree with his politics, but mark it down. I'm saying here on August 3rd, I think he's going to win. Now, let's see what happens. Now, let's move some politics out of the way and let's move over to tech. Now, the biggest probably news story in tech right now is Uber and Didi Chuxing in China merging into one entity. Now, why this is a big deal is essentially the reason Uber has not gone public in the past is they were pouring billions and billions of dollars into China to try to win that market. And they this week threw up the white flag and said, well, we lost. We didn't win. We're not going to win. But maybe we can sort of work out something with Didi Chuxing to at least profit from that. Now, there was definitely a lot of hands in this cookie jar, a lot of backdoor deals going on because they kind of come out and said neither one of them has ever earned a profit in China. The investors themselves are sick of them not earning a profit. So it seems that some people sort of, look, we want to make some money. No one's winning from this. Let's sort of try to work together. So now you have Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, Apple, Uber, Didi Chuxing, and I believe there's one more, 7 or 6 major tech companies who are all now going to be invested in this one sort of super transportation entity in China. Now, what that produces, who knows? I would kind of think that, let's be optimistic. I really think that based off the speeches that I believe it's the CEO of Didi Chuxing, she's really talked a lot about trying to do stuff with public transportation. And as someone who has spent time in the US and overseas, one of the biggest things I miss about not being overseas is the public transportation. It's easy, it's convenient, it's safe, it's cheap. But in the US, it's just a disaster. It's just organized, it's gross. And the only thing that I guess seems somewhat linked to that, or that's kind of worked in the US, that's at least privatized, would be Chery and SF. And I think their model is interesting. It could potentially scale out, but right now, many of the public transportation systems throughout the US really just can't support them any more growth, despite people trying to rely on them, despite people saying, look, I don't want to drive as much. I'd much rather use this. It's just not a viable option. Or you see the DC Metro saying they may have to close down certain sections for years simply because their system has gotten in such a bad state of disrepair. So it'll be interesting to see if Didi and Uber and all these super tech companies can come up with a solution. Maybe they'll be the ones to come up with autonomous vehicles. It really presents an interesting opportunity, but it also too could prevent or create a lot of collusion that prevents either one of them from actually innovating. So, let's wait and see. And then there's the fall of Twitter. If you think back to 2012, it was Twitter, 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 Twitter. Twitter is where you go for news. Twitter is where you go to engage in conversations. Twitter is where you go for real-time updates on anything. And now since the mythical return of Jack Dorsey, he seems to have managed to screw up 2 companies. You have Square, which since IPOing has just been kind of vanilla. There doesn't seem to be a lot of news coming out of it. Obviously, there's a lot of people who still use it, but it just seems to have been like, okay, and now a slow and steady decline. And then you have Twitter, which was, okay, we have some ideas, and nope, now we're done. We're done. We all should just go home. Because I think that what they've done is they've really pushed out the voices of the day. It's essentially become a, look, we are going to essentially mostly be a social justice warrior microphone that's going to amplify a left-wing perspective. And then we're also going to have some occasional cultural events. And we're also going to have some funny commentary on current news. But what they've lost is most of the engineers have gone to Uber. A lot of their sort of business people are looking for other careers because I think they see the writing on the wall. There's no real new sign of growth. Twitter, to me, also too, their most underserved market, or perhaps business niche, is Black Twitter. But you look at their board, you look at their leadership team, there's not someone on there who I think really understands Black Twitter, the culture references, the Chris Rock jokes, the Oscars. There's a lot of that subculture that if Twitter could find a way to enhance that, grow with that, really have that be a marketing force, I think could save them. They probably would not be as big as they are now, but at least they could craft out a niche for them that people could come. But when you don't do that and you kind of get rid of the funniest conservative guy that's on there, Milo, and you just sort of say, oh, he's dangerous or he's racist or he's whatever. I mean, the guy's basically said he's gay, he's a conservative, he's just going to say what he wants. And whether or not you agree or disagree with him, he technically does have the right to say what he wants. Now, that being said, by getting rid of him, from banning from the platform where you allow other people on the opposite perspective to continue, you essentially say, look, we're biased, but we're not going to pretend we're biased, or we're going to pretend we're not biased. And then you should still keep using the platform. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot of conservative and moderate people leaving the platform. And you look at kind of the live news stories, and it's probably, 98% liberal to 2% conservative. And that probably has also, to some extent, of there's a lot more excitement on the Democratic side because they just vehemently hate Trump. But I think it's also, too, that most of the people just are not on the platform. So I'd be really curious to see if they can fix that going forward. Now, to global news. The Olympics are finally here. And while normally I'd be really excited for that, I think we may actually manage to see an Olympics that are worse than Sochi, which is really saying something when you have a Russian president who essentially had the Olympics to give kickbacks to all his buddies. So, props to you, Brazil, for finding a way to sink to a new level. Now let's see, we have out of control game violence. Check. Questionable water quality. Check. Bad facilities. Check. Impeach president. Check. Oh, and yeah, Zika virus. Were you planning to have kids? Probably shouldn't go to the Olympics. So what's going to happen there is going to be really interesting because it seems that that country is on the brink of collapse. You have so much of South America that seems to be in various stage of hurting or political just disarray that's definitely going to seep over, I would think, as well to Brazil. But then you've also just had them coming off the World Cup 2 years ago, and all this money they've now spent on these facilities that they're not going to see a return on, that you're not going to see growth from. You've seen Petrobras essentially become wrapped up in a scandal, which was a major employer in their country, and you're just not having the tax base that Brazil needs and expected to invest in infrastructure that they needed to really make these games work. So I think there's going to be a lot of problems. Now, I think another issue is I think the Olympics have lost some of their magic. I mean, you think back to videos that you may have seen or stories you read. The Olympics used to have this very mythical quality, whether it was country A versus country B in a hockey match, I guess that would be the US and USSR in a hockey match, or people breaking, new records. You just don't really see that as much. I mean, I feel like a lot of the best things have already happened. Usain Bolt's probably going to be past his prime. Michael Phelps probably past his prime. Sure, the women's gymnastics will probably be entertaining, but I don't think there's going to be as much shock or surprise. And there's so much other stuff now that people are going to want to watch instead, or whether it's your Netflix, whether it's online streaming, whether it's YouTube, that it's almost just, well, how do I fit the Olympics in? I mean, maybe I'll watch a sport here, maybe I'll watch a sport there, but there's just almost too much predictability. And I think just the stain of corruption that's really thoroughly festered in FIFA has certainly left to the IOC. You're seeing a lot of that come out now, with particularly the Japanese winning one of the Olympics in the future. And I think it's just people are just sort of sick of these mismanaged, disorganized, corrupt sporting events. Now, the only possible thing that I think could come out that'd be interesting would be the U.S. or China winning more medals than the U.S. I know that's really been a big push of theirs. They've kind of become closer and closer. And I think, too, this could really be a make or break year for them to do that, because I think you're seeing a lot of parents who they're kind of moving their kids away from the state-sponsored schools. They really want them to have an education. They want them to have a future outside of this very narrow athletic mind. That, sure, there'll always be sports that China will compete in, but I think this overall breadth that they were going for will probably run out soon. So if they're going to do it, it would probably be now. So I guess we'll wait and see. And then finally, for some Japanese girl power, Yuriko Koike most recently won the mayorship of Tokyo. And if you know anything about Shinzo Abe and his push to try to get more women in the workforce, I think this is a very exciting thing. Particularly when she had a former political opponent come out and says, "We cannot leave Tokyo to a woman with too much makeup." And what was her response was, "Well, I'm used to it." If that is not the biggest, screw you, without being insulting, without being mean, it's just like, look, I won, deal with it, let's move forward. I think it really presents an exciting opportunity because there's just a huge underserved market of female employees that are forced to choose between having a family and being involved in business or in an occupation. And I think if her election to the mayor of Tokyo can fix it even just a little bit, I think it's really exciting for Japan in the future. And with that, that is going to bring us to a close for the first episode of Horizon. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you'll come back next week. If you have any feedback, have any comments, be sure to leave them below, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.